Well, one person who's taken a close interest in Iranian affairs is John Bolton, former US ambassador to the UN and a former national security advisor to President Trump. Ambassador Bolton, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Washington, D.C. I'd like to start by asking you, what's your understanding of what's been achieved during these last 2 weeks with regards to curbing Iran's nuclear ambitions?
Well, I think the combined effect of the Israeli and U.S. strikes has been to set the program back very considerably. There's a lot of debate in Washington today about the extent of that. But, Rafael Grossi, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, referred to enormous damage. I'm willing to take that. We'll find out more later. But it's a significant setback. It doesn't eliminate the program. It certainly doesn't eliminate the regime in Tehran. That's the real source of the problem. But I think this is a good start, at least.
A good start, but not obliterated. I'm not hearing you use that kind of language.
No, I don't think the evidence is there for that. As I say, we'll certainly learn more. I think Grossi's words really are a pretty good assessment at this point. The real question is, does the regime try to recreate the program? We already have indications that they've had some sites they've concealed from the International Atomic Energy Agency. No surprise there. And perhaps other activities. So I think we have to keep a very close watch on it, because the threat of Iran's possession of nuclear weapons is not just a problem for Israel. It's a global threat of nuclear proliferation.
You were calling for strikes on Iran a very long time ago. Does all of this feel a bit like a vindication?
Well, unfortunately, if it had been done 20 years ago, it would have been easier and far less risky, and we wouldn't be at the brink of having a nuclear power based in Tehran. I think the world's got a lot of serious crises going on right now. The war in Ukraine, threats from China in the East and South China Sea, and obviously the incredibly difficult situation in the Middle East precipitated by the Hamas attack on Israel on October the 7th, 2023. So the real trouble here, I think, the source of it is Iran under this regime. I don't think there's a chance for lasting peace and security in the region until that regime is overthrown.
Given that this was a once-in-a-generation sort of level of hostilities, in fact, the greatest hostilities we've ever seen between Iran and Israel and the United States, I mean, and you say this is a good start, does that mean you think Israel and the United States should have gone further?
I think much more could have been done. I think it was a mistake to stop the attacks. It would have been one thing to pause them so that the battle damage assessments, as they call them, could have been refined, and we could have had a better idea, perhaps also how Iran was responding. Were they moving uranium or equipment around? Could we verify additional sites that we had not yet known? But also, I think the strikes were very destabilizing against the regime itself. We'll now wait to see if the people of Iran, who I think are very dissatisfied, we'll see if they try and take matters into their own hands here. You've seen a real decimation of the top Iranian military and Revolutionary Guard leadership. I think the regime is a lot more fragile than it appears from the outside.
Yeah, you've alluded twice already in this conversation to regime change in Iran, and President Trump has sounded rather opposed to that. Why do you think that is?
It's a mystery to me. He was opposed to it in the first term as well. Now, today, there are reports in Washington that we're offering to finance a commercial nuclear power project in Iran, which I think is madness. The regime's on its back, and this is not the time to throw them a lifeline.
Okay, and there's talk now of another Iran nuclear deal being struck. Do you think a deal should be struck with the leadership that's there in Tehran?
The only deal to strike is how to remove the nuclear capacity that they now have. When we dismantled the Libyan nuclear weapons program in 2004, we packed a lot of it up and took it to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where it currently resides. There's still space at Oak Ridge for the Iranian nuclear weapons program. That's worth negotiating. But any possession of these nuclear capabilities by this regime, I think, would just risk getting us right back into the dangerous situation we've been in now for so many years.
been a very busy few days. We had President Trump ordering the strikes on Iran last weekend. Iran responded 2 days later. Then President Trump brokered a ceasefire. Hasn't it all been rather hasty, in your opinion?
Well, I think it has been, and I think it shows that although Trump did make the difficult decision to strike, that it wasn't part of a larger strategy. And I think that's always dangerous, because if you get into a circumstance and you don't know how it could play out or what your options are and your path to a successful conclusion, you're at risk. I think the Iranian response has been defiant. That could be pre-programmed. They're still probably assessing how badly they've been damaged. But as I say, when they're pressed like this, when they've seen their terrorist proxies around the Middle East decimated, we've seen the fall of the Assad regime in Syria, which hopefully leads to a government that is not a friend of the Iranian government. Things are moving here in a very favorable direction. And if the regime itself is in as much trouble as I think and hope that it is, there's no reason to give it a hand up.
Do you see Iran doing something else after those attacks on the military base here in the Middle East? Do you see that as a likely scenario?
Well, it would be important to watch. Will they try to resurrect the nuclear weapons program? Will they try to again resume substantial assistance to Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis? Do they have that capability? I suspect militarily they're in very, very difficult shape, and a lot of the top leadership has been eliminated. This is when regimes start to fragment at the top, with the supreme leader who's in his mid-80s and not well, and no clear succession path. I think they're in a very tricky position inside Iran, and that's where the people's pressure against the regime could really make a difference.
How likely do you see regime changes being?
Well, I don't know that it's necessarily going to come tomorrow, but the Ayatollah Khamenei is only Iran's second supreme leader since the revolution of 1979. So it's not like they've got a well-ordered constitutional process to pick a successor. And I think that's the moment when you could really see the top officials in the military, the Revolutionary Guard, and even among the Ayatollahs, you could see real fractionation of the leadership, and that's when it could begin to collapse.
Given that this issue of Iranian affairs, the Iranian nuclear program, is an issue so close to you and your career path and things you've been saying over the years, did the Trump administration reach out to you at all with regard to this?
Well, let me put it this way. I spoke to certain people in the administration. I wouldn't want to reveal their names for fear of damaging their careers with the White House. But look, I think there was a very broad consensus, certainly within the Republican Party, that striking the nuclear program was the right thing to do. Again, not just simply because of Israel, but because of the proliferation threat that Iran posed around the world.
Now, you were present, just moving on to the NATO summit last week at The Hague. You were present at the July 2018 NATO summit, at which President Trump lambasted alliance members for not spending enough. He's just got them to commit to 5% of GDP spend on defense. Do you think this NATO summit at The Hague is going to go down as having been a success?
Well, I think making the commitment is a success, although in 2014, when they made the 2% of GDP commitment, that wasn't carried through 10 years later, which was the goal. So we'll see what happens. I think it's a step that's necessary in a very dangerous and challenging world. But making the commitment is easy. Following through on it is the difficult part.
Does that summit and the unanimity we saw in it, this sort of the sense of harmony, does that send out a message, do you think, to the wider world, in particular to hostile powers?
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, we still have a hot war in Ukraine because of the Russian aggression. I'm sure that China has watched very carefully what happened in the Middle East this week and watched the NATO summit. And by and large, I think they should be far more cautious in their behavior in light of this week.
Just lastly, a new label for President Trump emerged at that summit during his exchange with the NATO Secretary General, Daddy. What do you think of that?
Well, fortunately, that wasn't an American assertion. It came from the Secretary General of NATO. I'm sure that'll go down as a meme in social media history, but that's not really how I think most people in the U.S. view their role in the world.
You don't look at President Trump as being a father figure?
For goodness sakes, no.
perhaps not for the rest of the NATO alliance members either. You don't think he looks at them as sort of perhaps being, you know, in a childhood sort of setting, in a brawl setting? That seems to be what Mark Rutte was getting at.
Right. Well, maybe he does, but I don't think the rest of us do. I think they're adults too.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for sharing that with us, Ambassador John Bolton. A pleasure talking to you.
Glad to be with you.